Kia ora, everyone. Welcome back to our latest Econ Talk. Gareth, we've seen the latest labour market statistics come out over the last week. Unemployment actually falling, the unemployment rate dropping a little bit down to 5.3%. Still high, but coming off slightly from that 5.4% we saw earlier. Now, as much as that sounds like good news and that, there was fewer people that were unemployed, that's technically true, but it's not necessarily because everyone got jobs. It's because we saw more people that are effectively moving out of the labour force for one reason or another. We saw, for example, the participation rate drop again. So when we look at unemployment, we're specifically talking about people that are actively searching for and available for work. If they're neither of those, if they're either not available, they can't start in the next couple of weeks, or if they're not properly seeking, and you've got to do something more than just peruse and cruise through the jobs board, you're not technically unemployed. You're in the NILF group, the not in labour force group, sitting outside of things. Now, interesting to look through the figures, right? You did see a further increase in employment. That was the good news. An extra 4,000 people in the workforce, up 0.2% on a seasonally adjusted quarterly basis. So there was a bit more momentum showing through before the Iran war. Unemployment again dropping back away. The underutilisation rate remaining where it was, I think, at 12.3%. All in all, a lot of moving parts in this one. It wasn't as straightforward as more jobs, better outcomes, labour market doing better. Equally, the labour market didn't look like it was getting any worse. It just really sort of wasn't going anywhere. And that's, of course, before all of the conflict coming through with Iran. The other bit, though, that I thought was interesting was what was happening with wage pressures, hours worked, sort of some of the non-jobs figures directly. We're seeing a few more hours being worked in the economy, both on the paid hours and the worked hours basis. That was encouraging. Wage pressures remaining at sort of 2.0% when we look at the likes of the labour cost index and similar. I mean, considering that all of this effectively predates the Iran war, what do you make of things going forward? Do you think that there has been sort of a better level of economic activity in the run-up to this conflict? And most importantly, what do you think happens to wages when there's a lot of spare capacity but a lot of pressures that households are under too?
Yeah, I think we're seeing the fruits of just a bit of an upturn in the economy in late 2025, early 26, starting to flow through pre-conflict, as you say, to the job numbers that have been coming through. So a measure of consistency there in terms of finally starting to get that economic recovery that we've been promised for so long. Of course, the conflict does sort of throw a big cat amongst the pigeons in terms of that. In terms of wage pressures, you're right, they're subdued, they're steady at 2.0% for the labour cost index in terms of growth there. It is interesting with the sort of conflict and the pressure that is putting on living costs, obviously fuel costs, but other goods and services will be rising in price as well. Labour market, yes, there's some slack in there at an unemployment rate of 5.3%, but certainly the messages we get talking to businesses are that they are still conscious about particular skills and roles where people are hard to find. And so, if you are moving into a phase where there is greater cost of living pressures over the next 12 to 18 months, we may well see that just start to be reflected in a little bit more sort of wage pressure coming through. It'll take some time, I think, and it may well be the case that it's more of a 27 and maybe into even early 2028 story rather than a 2026 story. But we do expect that businesses will want to look after the staff that they really value and say, yes, we understand you're under sort of cost of living pressures. We respect that. We want to make sure that you want to stay with us. And so we are willing to pay you a bit more, give you a bigger pay increase than might otherwise have been the case. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of the outcomes potentially of the conflict that we're seeing, even with a labour market, as I said, where unemployment at the moment, 5.3%, and probably going to remain a bit higher than we'd previously thought because of what is unfolding in the Middle East and the uncertainty that is throwing over the economy.
And I guess, look, that's an interesting point, right? Because you've seen a lot of concern out there, given the Iran war, the wider conflict that spread through, the fact that there's, of course, higher prices, there's much less confidence, hiring intentions have dropped back markedly in the surveys that we've got. I guess the question is, looking forward, noting that the crystal ball keeps being sort of, kicked down the garden path and is a little bit murky, shall we say, at the moment. What's that expectation around unemployment? Does it go higher? Do you think that businesses will outright fire people, or is it more just sort of restraint over time? And if so, how long are we talking before you start to see a little bit more relief on the jobs front and that sort of confidence from households picks up a bit more?
Well, how long are we talking about the war lasting? I guess is the answer to that question in one sense. But let me give you a better answer than that. Look, I think for the next 6 months or so, that uncertainty does just hamper the labour market. As you said, hiring intentions, employment intentions have fallen away markedly over the last few months. I was looking at the ANZ survey, for example, and the response there turning negative for the first time in 2 years at its lowest level for employment intentions, the lowest it's been in 3 years now. So bit of a drop off there. Job ad numbers, we don't have any sort of post-conflict data or post the start of the conflict data yet. So those job ad numbers they're up, I think, 11, 12% on where they were a year ago, but still 27% down on 2019 levels. So they're not particularly strong. And if we see those weakening in coming months, that will be an indicator of that labour market improvement that we've just seen the early signs of is stalling as well. So, look, you take all of that together. Yeah, we do expect unemployment probably to push a little bit higher in the near term. I think our forecasts have it going up to 5.5% through the middle of this year, so a touch higher than we had previously. And I'd say, if anything, the risks if the conflict sort of continues on and drags on for longer is that could well push higher. So that's where the balance of risks lies. We have effectively, when you look forward over the next, 3 or 4 years, really just delayed that recovery in the labour market and the drop in unemployment that we have been forecasting. We've pushed that out by sort of 6 to 12 months now. So it is a case of, as you say, sort of kicking things down the road a little bit further before they start to improve. I think in the near term, because of that uncertainty that businesses are feeling, if they are a little bit constrained in terms of their capacity and resourcing, if it's a choice between taking on a person in a full-time role or even a part-time role versus maybe spending a little bit more on AI and seeing what they can contribute to the business, the AI option is possibly the sort of lower risk one for businesses. You can cut it off pretty easily. The expense is lower. So that may well be a hampering factor, I think, for that turnaround in the labour market until we get more certain and positive economic conditions and geopolitical conditions internationally as well.
And that probably continues a trend we were already seeing to a degree. Data, but even before that, before the latest figures, suggesting that businesses were often opting more for part-time roles or as many part-time roles as full-time, and that the share of casual workers in the economy, which isn't large to start with, to be clear, but it had edged up to something like a 4-year high at the end of last year. So already sort of a level of uncertainty or lack of commitment coming through from businesses, likely to be exacerbated by the current uncertainty. We'll assess all of this going forward, how the unemployment rate evolves, how job opportunities evolve on a future Econ Talk.